Recording. Good to go.
Jesus is my boy. We're gonna go get tacos afterwards.
Alright, let's see.
Fucking love to get tacos. You know who I'd love to have tacos with? I forget his name. He was the lead character in Machete. He played the lead character in Machete.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking
What the hell is his name? I forget all of a sudden.
about. Alright, you ready to get started?
Yeah.
Alright, hey everyone, welcome to the live Q&A. I'm Michael Dunham, founder of XMD Academy. Today we'll be talking to Eric Askue from Collapse Industries. Collapse makes statues and resin models. We're going to be talking how he got into 3D printing and what knowledge will be taken away from a 6-week course from XMD Academy. You can check out xmdacademy.com for more info on this course. And we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, just post them in the chat. We're streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Zoom, and Twitch. So feel free to ask whatever you want. So welcome, Eric. Can you tell me, or can you tell everyone, how many years have you been doing 3D printing?
We're in 2019. Honestly, it's somewhere between 6 and 7 years. So quite a while. I've been messing with it for 6 or 7 years. It's pretty extraordinary stuff. But yeah, 6 or 7 years. By the way, did you hit record?
Yes, I hit record.
Kind of a little inside joke. Sorry.
We're good to go. Do you remember what sparked your interest in 3D printing?
I can probably say that Jared and Brandon Shiflett and Simon Lee. I didn't know about the resin community, and I was fascinated with what they were doing. I had started sculpting at the school I was teaching at. I started sculpting in clay, but I was much faster and much more capable in the computer. And when I saw 3D printing, I knew that was going to be a major shift in a lot of the industry. In our previous interview, we've talked about when you're in an industry long enough, you can track trends. One of the first trends that I picked up on was digital art, going digital, as well as, say, for instance, normal maps. These are all things that I got to experience, coming up. And 3D printing was just sort of that thing for me, because it answered a lot of questions for me about how to make a product. So I ended up doing that. I ended up picking up. There's a book out that I have in my library called Pop Sculpture, which I'm trying to see if I can eyeball it, which you can't, of course, because I just cleaned up the studio, so I don't know where it is. That helped me really understand toy making, specifically the statue world of, say, for instance, Marvel and DC stuff, and I met a lot of artists that way. So, yeah, the short of it is that trends were pushing me in that direction. Things that I was interested in were pushing me in that direction. And it was very obvious to me that it was the way to sort of go. I think that one of the other things I want to bring up is one of the big developers of products was Gentle Giant. I was really surprised at what they did with it. And in the early years, they were like, "We're fascinated with this technology, but it's not there yet," because they had to do an excessive amount of post process with the early prints, because I think they were using FDM in the early prints. So the big printing types in the beginning were PolyJet and FDM. SLA had existed, but it was just way outside of everybody's price range back then. So I was messing with PolyJet, which is probably the one I like the least for 3D printing, but it does a pretty good job for certain things. So yeah.
Now so how did you actually learn 3D printing? Like where was your start as far as?
Luckily, we had a polyjet at the school I was teaching at, and I was really lucky to be working with another guy who I had a lot of admiration for, and he basically tolerated me because I was like, I want to learn this thing, I want to use this thing, I want to get, so I was always up his butt and wanting to understand what the heck was going on. And we printed a few things. Sadly, I don't have anything from that time period because a lot of the polyjet stuff is really, really fragile. Actually, you know what? I do actually. The first piece that I ended up printing and then going through wax stage is this piece here. This is really pretty poor, but this was sculpted in ZBrush early days. We polyjetted this. I made what's called a sacrificial mold, and then I cast this in wax.
Yeah.
And the wax casting allowed me to tool it because if you use a jeweler's wax, which is a small crystal, and I used a custom jeweler's wax, and I resurfaced the whole thing. I was able to sand it and polish it. In fact, he was in the wax, which I have a piece of someplace. The head was almost like mirror smooth because I didn't want to do hair. I wanted to be bald, the character, so I could do like liver spots and stuff like that. Sadly, this casting was done with old resin because I was going to retire the mold because I had sold a whole bunch of these and given a bunch away. But this is the first piece I was able to 3D print from that era, 7 years ago. So very different way of doing things. Luckily, I had my pressure caster, or my pressure pot, which I still have. I still use that thing, which is back there.
Yeah.
It's that expensive container. You cast under pressure when you can. It's either pressure or rotation or centrifuge, but it removes bubbles in your casting. So, yeah, it was a very, very different time period, and the post-processing was different because you had to do more steps.
Yeah.
Now post-processing is you take it out of the printer, give it a little bit of sanding or give it a little bit of chemical bath, and then you once it's ready to go, you can just start making molds with it.
Now, on average, how long would you say it takes you from when you start a 3D print all the way to the process of printing itself? I know it's a difficult question, but just
Are you talking about making a model?
No, like when you're done with the model, and you're
all right. So we're done with the modeling phase.
Yeah, and you are going through your cut up, your slicing, just the refining stage.
If we were talking a bust or even a piece like this bust here is the 3-piece. Or if we were talking, say, for instance, this piece here, which this one's still a little dusty. I managed to clean this one. This one by Simon Lee. Now, this was not 3D printed. This was just mold and cast. He sculpted this in Chavant's non-sulfur plastic or NSP. This is 4 pieces. This guy's 3 pieces. These guys, if I had a model of this one in the computer or this one, which I still have, I could do the cut up in less than a day. If it's a full character, not a diorama, but a full character, arms, legs, torso, and a lot of gear, like the Thor character. Spicer's Thor character took me the better part of a week. Most of that was because of the layering, but also the cleanup. When I talk about it in the video, all models have the same issue, which is that when you build it in the computer, you kind of build it from the outside in to some degree, which ends up making cavities and pockets and envelopes. That gets you in trouble when you're molding and casting. That model had so much cool stuff on it, and to get just the right contours in just the right places, because of how it was layered, took quite a while to sort of part it out, figure out which pieces were going to go where. So for instance, if you had like layered plate mail, some plate mail might be still attached to the shoulder while some might be attached to the arm, and you kind of have to go through and you have to sort that stuff. It can take a while. I think I put I think I put about 5 days into that piece, and I was rushing, and uh, I didn't even do envelope cleanup or pocket cleanup, which is going through and filling in all the cavities and pockets in that model. So that was probably one of the more complex ones I've done in a while. And the reason that it takes so long is you're doing a lot of tedious work. It's not that it's hard. It's just time consuming because you as the artist or the craftsman or the engineer have to be smart enough to find where all the failures are going to come in, because those pockets and those cavities, man, they're the worst. You get one in a SLA print that you can't backfill or that isn't going to close on its own, and it could cause vapor lock and peel the part right off the build plate, and then you've wasted resin, you've wasted time. If you've got clients waiting for the product, you can push back your clock. It's not good. So you want to be very thorough. That's why it takes so long. Not to mention that if you're working with somebody like my boss, he's going to check the model too.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you're not on point, like luckily we work really closely together, but if I wasn't on point, he'd send it back and then I'd have to redo the work. But thankfully we check everything. We double check everything. With the Thor model, because we weren't going to print it and it's just for example purposes, I was able to make all the choices myself. But a lot of times if you're working with somebody else, you really have to consider what they need as much as what you need to get the product done. So the complex model can take a while. I did a diorama though that had just as many pieces as Spicer's Thor character for his class. But maybe because it was a diorama and it wasn't all cramped into a smaller area, that one took a little less time, but it was a lot of pieces. So sometimes it really is about how things overlap and how you create families. That's what you're doing. You're creating families. Okay, arm, buckler, weapon, all that stuff is one family, and you have to like treat it that way. Or a better way is subtools. You have to get those subtools in the same group. So
what for somebody starting out in 3D printing, what would you say are your must-haves, like software? If you're going with a resin printer, what type of resin?
Okay, you and I have talked about this in private, and we also had somebody ask this question: what's the best printer for a novice? It's hard to say because both printers have different requirements. An SLA printer is going to have different requirements than an FDM printer. In some ways, an FDM printer is much simpler to deal with than an SLA, because an SLA is kind of messy, it's kind of sloppy, it's much more organic in the sense that you're dealing with a resin, whereas an FDM you're extruding filament, so it's a little bit less messy. But in that same statement, an SLA print, if it's an SLA print, like say for instance, let's say we're SLA printing this, we'd be SLA printing this arm, the body, all that stuff would be separate. And the support matrix is going to be different, and we get a higher resolution of Z layers. We get more Z layers per part, okay? So in some respects, there's less cleanup, there's less post-process. But in that same sentence, if I'm making terrain for a tabletop game, this is FDM. It's light, it's easy to work with, it prints relatively quickly. But if I hold this up close, you can see sometimes you can see the grow lines right through this little pocket. The short answer is not which one's best for your skill level, which one's really what the question should be. If we were to rephrase the question is, what's the best? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Do you want to make statues? Do you want to make tabletop stuff? Do you want to make props? If you and I said, hey, we're starting a fabrication business, and our whole fabrication business is about making cosplay stuff, I'd want a large bed FDM printer because it's light, it's cheap, it's easy to work with. The parts are easy to finish with a little bit of sanding or a large particle primer, which will fill in some of the Z lines.
Yeah.
So saying that you're a novice just says your knowledge base isn't really there. In which case, what I would say is find a maker space and learn about what they have, which is probably FDM, or find a college or a university and see if you can learn from them a little bit, because I think that that's a better way of exploring the question. I will say this, both an FDM and an SLA have safety concerns. SLA, more than anything, needs to be vented outside.
Yeah.
And you can't have animals around it, and you can't have kids around it, and you can't have food around it, and you certainly don't want it in your bedroom or your bathroom or anywhere you're going to be breathing the stuff that outgasses. Even an FDM printer outgasses. It's just not as much because you're going from solid to semi-solid or semi-liquid.
Yeah.
Resin's a little bit more touchy, and the chemical, I don't know the proper term, but we're going to call it a photoactivator. The photoactivator in SLA printing resin is the most toxic substance in that resin. And chemicals, all chemicals, just because you can buy it off the shelf doesn't mean it's safe. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying you have to be willing and prepared to deal with the chemicals and the process in which you're working with. And it's relatively safe, but you need to be, you need to be thorough. You need to be clean. You need to have a clean space, and above all else, all of these printers need temperature control and humidity control. Too much humidity with an FDM. It's like I'm pointing at my printer. I have an FDM that I experiment with. We do experiments here. Most of the main printing is done in our Pensacola and Virginia facilities.
Yeah.
But if you have too much moisture, you'll get layer separation on an FDM part. Okay. If you have too much, if it's too cold and your ambient temperature is fluctuating, you'll get layer separation on a part. Yeah. SLA, the same stuff can happen. If you have too much moisture in there, you can contaminate your resin. It can create foaming, or it can create defects. It can even create pitting in the surface of your part. So a lot of these, I know that we're kind of moving away from the question, but a lot of these things are concerns, and they're things that you don't learn about unless you're really invested in understanding what the drawbacks, what the advantages are, and what the drawbacks are of these pieces of equipment. Yeah. And they're tools. They're not make pretty buttons. You have to really work at making them function.
Now we have one question. We have a couple questions. Nigel asks, what are your thoughts on 3D printing guns in America?
I'm sorry, Nigel, I'm not even going to talk about that question. It's not appropriate for both my course or for this conversation. I'm sorry.
All right.
Next question.
Stefan, he wanted to know what printer the sculpt that's right in front of you was printed on.
This one is done in clay. This one was done in an early SLA printer. Might have been a Form 1. I don't know. I had to order this one. I ordered it. I made the model. I ordered the part. The part came to me, and then I molded and cast it here in this shop. It came in pretty good, honestly, but I know for a fact it came in good because of the post processing, not because of the printer. So I'll hold that still for just a second. But this is sculpted by me.
Yeah, that one looks nice and clean.
Yeah, a lot of what they did was all about the post process.
Okay, so you have a course on xmdacademy.com.
Yes.
And let's see, your course is Moving Between Dimensions, Toy Manufacturing 3D Printing Pipeline.
Yes.
Mouthful of a course, but awesome information. Could you tell everyone a little bit about your course, what you're going to go through, what they expect to learn?
A lot of what I'm going to go through, guys, is the process of making something, not the sculpting side of things, but making this product printable. Okay. how to get the best results, which means we're going to talk about print angle. How's it going to go in the printer and be printed? We're going to talk about cut up. We're going to talk about standard keys. We're going to talk about something that Mike has been infinitely generous about, which is my discussion about draft angles, which is something that revolves around keys and the intersection of parts. Draft angles matter both in the 3D printing process, but also in the molding and casting process. No matter what side of the world you're working, or what aspect of the manufacturing process you're dealing with, draft angles are truly necessary. And we're also going to talk about things that are going to crop up. Things like, say, for instance, if you make sharp corners on an FDM and you didn't put a bevel on it or a draft angle on it, it's going to create a beaded edge. It will always create a beaded edge, and it has nothing to do with your software. It has everything to do with the model. We're going to talk about mold jackets, which is how you can make a jacket that holds your mold so you can cast the part and use very little silicone. Silicone's expensive. Honestly, we're going to talk about so much stuff. The things that we're not going to get into is how I make a model. We may discuss that in the live sessions a little bit, but the truth is that Spicer's already covering that. We're also not going to go into in the course, we're not going to go into silicones and resins. That's a casting course, and that's a different animal. But we are going to talk about software. We're going to talk about supports. We're going to talk about different types of printers that are available to you on the market. I'm going to try and help you guys understand how to CYA when it comes to working with this equipment, because I know a lot of people have bought stripped down versions of the equipment because it's cheaper. In fact, one of the machines that's out there is so stripped down that the heat regulator has been removed from it and is known to cause 4 house fires in the US. So you got to spend some money. We'll talk about safety issues. We'll talk about most everything we're going to talk about is software based, but we will talk about the hardware in an overview kind of method, because a lot of what you really want to know is already out there in forums, but a lot of things you don't know is basically the insides of this part, and then how to make it so that if you want to make a mold and cast, how do we get there? Because we're printing our mold jackets now. We've printed one successful mold jacket with our technique. We're going to make a few edits to it, but overall the principles are sound. And I've actually already made another video which I'm going to add to the course for mold jackets. It's going to be an intense course. It's a lot of stuff that most people think they understand and they know, but because they're not working with the people that I work with, the molding and casting guys, they may not be aware of in the way that I am. And I'm sorry that sounds a little arrogant. It's not. It's just that I've had a lot of people tell me, hey, we need to make these changes because this product isn't going to fly the way that you built it in the computer. And that's a real issue. And until you get your hands dirty with going from the computer to the real, there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding or lack of knowledge information.
Now, as far as, we talked about what people are going to learn, but what key piece of knowledge are you going to say that your students are going to take away from this course?
I think the draft angle thing, the draft angles is probably the most important thing. It's the thing that very few digital artists understand. That and maybe tolerances. You really do need a gap between parts. Most of my gaps are measured in somewhere between 10 and 50 micron gaps. A micron is the next smallest measurement to a millimeter. Also, we'll talk mostly metric, but we'll convert back and forth a little bit because I use metric mostly for the computer. A lot of people in the computer will make them without any gap, without any tolerance, and the parts don't fit together if there's warping or shifting or if there's swelling, and the whole thing will fall apart. Or you'll have to post-process the hell out of it with sandpaper, and that's probably the worst thing that you could ever have happen. In fact, one of our teammates actually was telling me a horror story about exactly that thing. He didn't have enough tolerance in a print that he was experimenting with, and it bit him hard.
Yeah,
So
especially if you have a bunch of them that are molded and casted from that, and then going and cleaning all that up.
well, hopefully you're you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Do we have any other questions, guys?
Yeah, actually, we've got just a couple. We've got so Marta asked, do you know any cubic photon DLP? If so, what do you think about it and its resin?
We're actually talking with the Anycubic people for one of our products. It's a fairly decent printer. It's not the one that I would personally want to have. In fact, what we're looking at for some of our stuff is a frozen.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking to get a handful of frozens in our Pensacola shop. But we have the Anycubic in our Virginia shop, and we actually use it. It's pretty solid. It's just that the frozen has a few more options that we're really interested in. I'm going to say this: any tool can be a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so being stuck on a brand name is not how I like to look at things. I like to understand standards. I like to understand, is it open source enough for me to use experimental resins? I like to understand or know about power source. I like to know, does it have battery backups? I like to, I want to know all the features, and then I compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm.
The Anycubic's a fairly decent machine, if I remember correctly, and because I don't remember the specifications, I haven't looked at them in a while. I think their bed size is a little small, which is why we're looking at the frozen.
Mm-hmm.
It's a perfectly good machine, however. I've seen pieces off of it. In fact, I have it close near. I'm pretty sure my Hill Giant, which this is his hand and this is his chest and shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure this guy came off of an Anycubic. I'd have to check with my friend in Virginia, my partner in Virginia. But this has a layer shift we didn't catch before he sent it to me in the arm, so it doesn't go together properly. You can have layer shift on any printer. Even the best printer out there, you can have layer shift. So don't think that the Anycubic is bad just because we had a layer shift.
Now, funny enough, there's actually another question about the form. Do you think it's a good printer for a beginner?
I have mixed feelings about the form, and only because they're kind of like Apple, in that they lock you in and you're paying for a brand name. You can't use outsourced resins. You can't mess with the firmware. In some respects, that may be ideal for someone starting out. However, if I remember the form, it also doesn't have, and this is a problem with a lot of SLA printers, it doesn't have a direct vent system. Mm-hmm. A lot of the newer printers, not the Form 2 or anything like that, have a vent system where you can plumb a vent and run a dryer hose out a window or something. I feel, and both my partners in Pensacola and Virginia feel, it is necessary to have on an SLA printer. This is a personal opinion. It's a safety preference. But if you're running in your home shop, like a garage, like an insulated garage, you'd have to find a way to plumb it or to vent it outside. I don't have a problem with the products that the Form puts out. I just think that you're paying for a brand name. I think it's like Apple. They've locked it down. You can only use their resin. You can only use their membranes. You can only use their stuff. You can't do any third-party stuff. You can't mess with it. And I think if you open it, just like any Apple product, it is. I think the warranties on it are void. So I have really, because I build my own computers and because I work with people like Mike, I have a real desire to be able to flex with the hardware that I own when new things happen or when we want to experiment or want to try something. So I'm hesitant. I've always been hesitant to recommend the form.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things that they've done that are really good, both for the community and stuff, though, is that they've given out a lot of free machines to our peers. I'm pretty sure that I could rattle off 100 names of artists that you would all know from ZBrush who have form machines. A couple of my friends I laugh at because they have them and they left them in their boxes. They haven't used them. They've been too busy. So there are good things that form has done for the community, but I've had mixed feelings about them as a product.
Now, before we go, we're running out of time. Is there anything else you want to tell everyone? Okay, actually, I got one question for you.
Okay.
If anyone is on the cusp about signing up for this course, what would you tell them to get them to sign up today? There's less than 12 hours left for sign up.
I would say two things. One, although I'm a little crass, I'm a little rough around the edges, I have your back. I will give you more information than you know what to do with. And if I don't have the information, I have resources, and I will make a phone call and find out. I love this stuff, and I love sharing this stuff with people. Okay? So that's probably the number one most important thing. The number two thing that I would say, if you're really passionate about making statues, and they don't have to be creature statues. Creatures and monsters is what I'm into. Creatures, monsters, robots, all that stuff. If you wanted to make fun stuff, if you wanted to make cultural items, if you wanted to make chibi stuff, it doesn't matter to me. I'm all of that stuff can benefit from this course because all of them have very specific requirements when you go put it in the printer, whether it needs to be cut up in a special way or pivoted in such a way inside the printer to get the best results without all of the post-processing. Those are the kinds of things that I would be most excited to share with you and with you making your product. So.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming and listening to Eric talk about his course. His course is amazing. I've watched, I'd say about 75% of it. I'm getting to the other 25. Just been busy, but no, it is an amazing course. And
so you missed my rant on professionalism.
All right. Eric is an amazing teacher. His course is amazing, and if you take this course, you definitely are going to come away with a whole lot more knowledge than what you went in with. So if y'all could just go to xmdacademy.com. I have shared the sign up page for everyone. Just check it out, and we hope to see you. There's about 10 hours left for registration, so jump on in, and we hope to see you there. And thank you very much, Eric, for coming.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, see you guys.